time. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Yes, great. Let me go in presentation mode. Yes, okay, I'm gonna start the timer from now, 20 minutes. Okay, so thank you everybody for being here and welcome to my thesis defense about the European Critical Raw Material Act and the global energy justice dimensions of extractivism in Europe. I want to first thank Nick, my supervisor, Maida, my colleague and activist, Lara, my friend, my sister Marta for their support, because without them I would have probably not delivered a thesis at all. So let me just start straight with the motivation why I chose this topic. Minerals are the new oil, as we know, and conflicts are already happening around them. Then at the beginning of the master, we had this seminar with Fadel Kabob about decarbonization and industrialization of Africa, and that made me questions how in the post-growth utopia, global south and global north economies, we will probably converge. So with the global north taking on onshoring some of the extractive activities, while the global south moving up the value chain. And that made me, looking at that horizon, I said, okay, how can that horizon reconcile with the discourses that I often hear in the degrowth movement that we fight mining everywhere? And that is, I heard just last week in Barcelona, the alumni conference, someone saying we oppose mining everywhere. And in my opinion, the CRM Act, by ensuring these extractive activities, goes in the right direction, even though if it's done for the wrong motives, as we will see. So my research questions are how does the implementation of the European Critical Raw Material Act affect ecological distribution conflicts in Europe around extractivism, and what is the role of the social movements in shaping social ecological consequences of this act? Let me quickly introduce what this act is about. It's 5 publications, 5 legislative acts from 11 to 23, where the European Commissions try to assess the risks for the European Union to access materials, non-agricultural materials important for the industry, and then they draw some strategies to overcome these risks. The underlying idea is the circular economy will save us and will allow us to decouple economic growth from resource use, and we're seeing that this is working wonderfully. The critical raw materials are basically those ones with high economic importance and as apply risk, according to some assessment with a matrix and so on. This means that other materials that are easy to procure doesn't mean that are not important. They are called strategic materials because they are still important for industry, aerospace, decarbonization, and so on. In the 2023 Act, there are some targets benchmark set on extraction, on onshoring extraction, processing, recycling, and linking from one single major supplier. And how is this achieved? By basically exploring for minerals in Europe, calling these strategic projects that basically get fast tracking. And whenever the same is done outside the European Union, these are called strategic partnership that also get basically fast tracking. Methodology is that I applied. I'm going to be fast here, review the CRM Acts, then mapping global reserves and resources, European dependencies, lithium projects and ecological conflicts around them, principle of allocation of raw materials. Then I ran semi-structured interviews for my 2 case studies in the Balkans, and then made a discussion about EU energy policies with a optic of global energy justice and the implications for post-growth for the social movements that bring forward post-growth. So here we see that CRMs concentrate very much in China, in the global south. China supplies 50%, is the first supplier of 50% of these critical raw materials, often with thresholds above 50%. The European Union is very much dependent on the global south as well, and 50% of these critical raw materials are virtually no extractive activities in the European Union. Yes, a very quick test. The European Union was dependent on China in 2020 as a primary supplier for which percent of CRM Act. You can guess it in your head because we don't have time, and I'm going to give you the reply. It's 44%. Then here I say, okay, let's look at historical responsibility. Abiotic means basically metals. And we see that the share of global overshoot is very much concentrated in the global north, the global south, with a 70 to 85% of population is only responsible for a 23%. And the European Union, despite having only 6% of global population, consumes 20 to 25% of total production of raw materials. I went into the case for lithium, which demand is just crazy, and the recycling is almost not there. We know it's used mainly for batteries. Providers, suppliers of lithium are mainly concentrated in the global south, also for the European Union, while in the European Union, Portugal is the main supplier, but we see there are reserves also in Germany, Czechia, Serbia, Spain, Portugal, Finland, and Austria. I selected these two case studies in the Balkans. You see they are geographically very close, one in Lopare in Bosnia and Herzegovina, one in Serbia, the Jadar project. This is very fertile agricultural land where the communities oppose extractive activities because fear of water contamination, loss of biodiversity, loss of economic income from agriculture, but also loss of cultural heritage and sense of place. In both cases, the lithium will be used for electric vehicles with the German companies undertakers mainly. And the Lopare one is by Swiss-Canadian company Arcore, and the other one is by Anglo-Australian Chinese company Rio Tinto. The communities have mobilized in many ways, including with the petitions against the mine. Let me go into the interview structure. I first assess the positionality basically of the people that I interviewed. Then I asked about aspects of energy justice and features of social movement against the mines and the geopolitics of the Balkans. I managed to interview 10 stakeholders across these 4 categories: industry representative, policymaker, local community, environmental activist. Now, if Shakespeare was born at this time, he would probably been a degrowther because he has the piercing. And second, he would have created a Hamlet obsessed with the questions to dig or not to dig in Europe. And this is probably my main argument in the next slide. So it's clear that we need degrowth scenarios in the global north because by only equal allocation, we need a reduction from 80 to 90% of projected use. But even with demand cuts, is redistribution of sacrifice zone necessary to achieve real global justice? The projection says that we need 345 mines for energy transition alone. In a post-growth scenario, this number will probably go down. But how can Europe and the EU take their fair share? Maybe the question should be, how can mining be used for post-growth policies without reproducing extractive relationships? We know that the concept of global energy justice is anyway very complex, relying on different pillars that some often trade off with each other. And also, like atmosphere and the biosphere, transition metals are not seen as a global commons, despite global climate change is a global issue. Interview results. So the activists and the locals frame climate from a justice perspective. The industry representative and the policymaker more from a techno-optimist perspective. I'm going to be very fast on some of the tenants because I want to focus on the latter points. But basically, when it comes to procedural justice, we see that in both cases there is weak rule of law. Communities have not been involved. The processes have often flaws against national law and international treaties like the Aarhus Convention. When it comes to distributive justice, for some there is no redistributive justice because it's either the mine or people and agriculture. Someone lamented that the royalties are anyway very low. And in general, among the locals and the activists, there is a sentiment that the mine will bring more harm than benefits. when it comes to reparative justice, I asked if this critical raw material mining jeopardizes somehow the green transition, just transition for the locals, and the answer is yes, because it seems that a lot of green energy projects, and for example this one as well, are for export. So they say the locals, the Balkan people cannot afford the electric vehicles, energy projects like hydro with hydro energy or solar panels are often for export, while the locals for internal use, they keep burning fossil fuels and coal. Someone brought a very interesting perspective also on the fact that in the 90s there was war in these places, and they're undergoing depopulation and brain drain as well nowadays, and many people would like to return to these places in a restored nature and live a peaceful life. Furthermore, these projects are highly subsidized across the entire value chain, so that drains also resources for a people's transition, no? And the policymaker made the point that if the value chains are not in the respective countries, the projects are extractive, while for other people they are extractive anyways. When I ask about transformative justice, if there's an understanding of need for systemic change, it seems that the post-growth narratives are very niche. Someone said these are first world questions and we are not there yet. Maybe we cannot even call these movements, because in Serbia, for example, 60% of the population is against the project. Anyway, there is a socialist degrowth attitude on an individual level as consumers and members of society, as a legacy of Yugoslavia. For the policymaker, post-growth, it's something valid to debate. Here probably is the most important contribution on this global justice perspective, when I ask basically, okay, in the post-growth scenario, to balance out the distribution of sacrifice zones, do the Balkans play a role? Do we mine there or not? Have the Balkans sacrificed enough? And the answer, I get an entire range of answers, and I want to go through all of them. So some say, no, Germany is the one with the car manufacturers. They are also affluent. The European Union market will be the one consuming electric vehicles. Let's do the mine there. Some others say we shouldn't do the mine here, not anywhere else, because justice is a multifaceted concept. There is not just geographical, but also intergenerational. So why people now should pay for accountability of the past? Some say Bosnia and Herzegovina has sacrificed enough to transnational capital. The industry representative was very interesting, because he said, yes, we do the projects in Europe to pressure the global south, but it didn't bring any decolonial consideration. So of course, it was just trying to support the fact that we need to open the mines anyways. Someone else was saying, first we need to agree on a holistic vision over transformative alternative economy, and then we decide where to do the mine. And in my opinion, this is a bit a chicken egg dilemma. Some others said it's unfair that we indulge on the global south to extract these minerals. Maybe some areas are only for tourism. The US, UK, and historical polluters are the ones that have to pay the price. And someone else associated global south with the Balkans, say basically we have to do no mining anywhere there is no rule of law. So the communities are not heard. I'm going to skip on this one because it's on the conclusion. On the geopolitics, basically here the point of tension is that according to the benchmarks, you will contribute to the benchmarks only if the processing and the recycling is done in the European Union. But of course, one can say the projects are extractive if the supply chains are not in the respective countries. And I was wondering how the process of entering the European Union could interplay with opening the mining in a sort of discourse. If you give us the lithium, we give you fast access to the European Union. And for most of the stakeholders, despite there is some soft pressure, the two processes are separate. When I tried to get an understanding of how the narrative on the linking geopolitically from China, most of the stakeholders said there's so much concentration of supply chains in China that even if let's say we do some extraction in Europe, this will substantially not, if we have a geopolitical crisis with China and they cut supply, we are still in a bad position, basically. So it's more a PR political branding. And then Rio Tinto is the majority shareholder in the Chinese state, in the Chinese state company. Chinalco is the majority shareholder in Rio Tinto. For the Jadar project. Here I want to focus on other points that came out in the interview. I have 5 minutes. So basically the interview with the policymaker, in my opinion, was the most interesting because he was trying to bring the institutional perspective, but also his own perspective kind of came back from the background. And it was basically, when I told him as an electric SUV consumes 6 times the amount of lithium of an utilitarian car, he said, you cannot force a company to decide you cannot force a company to produce a specific model. But it's definitely something that should be discussed more. And I've been myself to the mine, and now I have an idea of the impact of these projects, but we cannot send everybody to the mine. And for me, this it shows 2 facts. First, the projects that get so many state subsidies, so much to affect the debt of the country and the deficit ratio. And they have so much opposition by the population, it's deemed unthinkable that the state can leverage on the use of lithium. And then there is a very much the bureaucratic approach from state officials and lack of cross-contamination or relevant knowledge when it comes to these projects. On the other hand, talking to the industry representative number 2, I asked, can you tell me about a golden case of due diligence and procedural justice for mining? And this person mentioned the Emiris project, where an independent institutional body was created to mediate across the stakeholders. So basically, according to this person, the external audit is the way, and in this project, the company paid for this external auditing. Now I want to go to the implication for the degrowth movement. I have 3 minutes. Currently, in my opinion, there is a reactionary discourse within the degrowth movement when it comes to mining, because I often hear no mining here, not anywhere else. And some say, given the current balance of powers between communities and companies, it's a legend to think that opening a mine in the global north will allow to close one in the global south without a radical rethinking of the productivist model. And the Lopare and Jadar projects, in my opinion, confirm such power imbalances. But on the other hand, the degrowth movement should strive for more than a reactionary narrative, and they should come down to the hard task of elaborating justice framework for redistribution of sacrifice zones and extraction, proactively ensure that the global south resources stay in the global south, and repoliticize the use of resources of new mining in Europe. So towards, for example, batteries for a fleet of electric buses rather than for electric SUVs, or even for the military. This is also another crazy story that now we need to we need to convert the car industry into military and use the resources for the military just to save the economy. In conclusion, the answer to the first questions is the impact of CRM Act. Yes, both the Jadar and the Lopare project could be candidates as a strategic partnership to the European Union for electric vehicles or for the European military. Where to place the supply chains is a point of tension to call the projects more or less extractive. These projects seem to jeopardize a just transition for the locals that are still dependent on coal. There's little trust over the European Union, its promises of democracy. The delinking narrative from China seems also to be disavowed. And most importantly, there is a general acknowledgement for the Global South right to develop and the injustice of indulging on extraction, where historically has always taken place. I have a minute, but most of the stakeholders claim that the same considerations will also be applied where the rule of law is weak, for example, in the Balkans, and reparative justice, therefore, should be on the shoulders of historical polluters. On the social movements, mining and degrowth. So lithium mining is framed by the stakeholders as a case for unjust transitions. There's no deep understanding of the root causes, no strong anti-capitalist, basically, discourse. There is a common dissatisfaction. What basically bring together people against the mines, there is a common dissatisfaction with the widespread corruption in the countries. This could apply to any project. And then there is an embodied common sense for sufficiency from former Yugoslavia. Also alternatives like the Majevica way, there is a plan for organic agriculture in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Then one stakeholder brought the point that economic planning from ex-Yugoslavia could be inspirational for actualizing a post-growth economy centered around eco-social needs within planetary boundary and beyond the stakeholders' polarizations. I want to finish with my main argument saying that maybe a CRM Act induced onshoring of mining activity in Europe could bring a leverage point for social movements to gain and raise awareness of the hidden cost of high-tech lifestyles based on private consumptions, and as well as demand post-growth and sufficiency policies. This was the end. Sorry for the huge amount of information.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. The plan now was to give Mariana and Nick both, 10 minutes, both between their questions to you and you replying to them. And then afterwards, us three would go into a separate call to discuss the grade. Maybe Chris or anyone else has some questions and you can just chat for 5 or 10 minutes and then we will come back and give the grade.
Okay, you managed to, the breakout room I have to create or?
We have one, yeah.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. So maybe we can start with Mariana.
Okay, so thank you, Linda, and congratulations for reaching this day of presenting your master research or thesis. I have to say that I learned, actually, I think you did you read many things. That's clear from reading your thesis, no? Going through and reviewing or the Critical Raw Material Act and analyzing how it changed over time. So you did a lot of work. It's clear you also did a lot of work trying to contact all the different interviewees and conducting the interviews and transcribing and analyzing. So first of all, it's clear that you did a lot of work here, gathering a lot of information. I have to say, from the perspective of reviewer, it's challenging to try to see how to review the document because it's in between this research paper and this report, trying to analyze all these different elements, no? So it's also challenging for me to assess, because I think you did in this first section a lot of work analyzing the Critical Raw Material Act and how it changed, but the core of your research actually is trying to understand these specific sites of contestation, no? And I actually think that there's a section you go through very fast, which is the one where you present these key concepts, the section 3, defining key terms, and you go very quickly into different definitions that I think you had the opportunity to elaborate more, because I think you're actually making some proposals, you're elaborating some new ideas here. All this discussion about what this is onshoring of green sacrifice zones, all this discussion, I think you had lots of potential to elaborate a bit more, because the onshoring and offshoring comes from a different literature, and here you're making a connection, which I think has a lot of potential to go deeper into that and discussing now what it means to onshore these activities. I don't know, because here I'm talking about the onshoring of the green sacrifice zones. You quote Lerner, but he's not exactly talking about that, if I remember well his book, but you are saying something new. So I also think that you there wasn't a potential there to elaborate more on these concepts, on this onshoring, offshoring of green sacrifice zones. And you also talk about green extractivism, and actually there's this discussion now between different actors that claim, what is the difference between extraction and extractivism? But I think it's there in your thesis somehow. So have you, I don't know, considered this discussion? What would be extraction without extractivism? That is a discussion that is taking place among some social movements that you don't exactly refer to it, but it's somewhere there, no? About what type of mining would be acceptable. And this is the way some discussions are taking place. Even if you agree or not with mining, which I maybe are more critical. And then I was also asking you, what is your own positionality in this thesis, no? So, because I do think you have a very strong one, from which you are looking at things. So maybe I would like to hear about how you place yourself, no? Your positionality in this discussion, which I think you're not only asking yourself questions and conducting a research, but you have like this policy lens, no? Of how you think this conversation, and this tension is in the thesis, so it's also difficult to assess. So maybe I would ask you to think about your positionality, to also think about how this could have influenced the specific way at which we're looking at these questions. Then when you analyze the interview, first of all, in terms of methodology, I would like to ask you maybe what you think are the limitations of you're basing more of your research in these interviews. How do you reflect on the limitations of these interviews, and maybe what you're missing, and if you had like alternative strategies to try to triangulate or look for other sources of information to complement those that maybe were not covered or covered enough by interviews, if you consider that. Then I see that you analyze, I'm throwing here different comments and questions, and then you answer as you think. Then I see that you analyze your interview through these dimensions of environmental justice, but you have not presented them. You have actually, I would say that it is important, if you use this framework to analyze your results, maybe it was important to maybe present and develop a bit more that framework, no? That then you would articulate with your interviews, and then because you also discuss about justice, this is something that you consider, like addressing a bit more these environmental justice frameworks. And then, well, I have maybe more comments, but just to finalize, I would ask you, maybe what did you learn from doing this research? What was a surprise for you? And yes, these two last questions, no? The lessons and the surprise from, I mean, your experience of going through this research. I think it's a research. You did a research. You could have developed a research paper as well. So based on all the information and so on. Yes, so these are my questions to you.
Can I reply? I've made some notes, but I saw other places doing all the questions, but I guess it's a bit too much. Can I reply?
No, yeah, the idea is for Mariana to go and then you to reply for all of her questions, and then we'll pass over to Nick. So
Okay.
Go ahead, Linda.
Okay, great. Yes. So I made some notes. You were saying what it means on shoring these activities. Elaborate a bit more on that. I had a lot of criticism also from the stakeholders on calling this sacrifice zones or not. Some people didn't like the term because it brings some coloniality and so on. But I don't know, maybe it comes also for my positionality and kind of radicalization through the master of seeing any disruption of nature with all the risks that can come also for water and basically self-sustaining life for humans that live around a mine. I kind of implicitly taken that conceptualizations of sacrifice zones. It's a ghost anyways, right? Even if it's not maybe if it's not in the conception of you know, subsistence living like we would see in Latin America, right? Where there's literally no alternatives for these people to survive. Maybe in the Balkans they have more options. They could move to another city and still find some sort of income, let's say. But so I kind of acknowledge that I've just decided to take that framing in my head, but not everybody was agreeing with the using the term. But it's also I have to say that in the definition of sacrifice zones, it says basically when you can call it sacrifice zones when the cost and the benefits the stakeholders that carry the cost and the benefits are different, no? So you do extractive activity for the benefit of third parties. And from the way they frame it, they say that we don't buy electric vehicles. This takes our resources for our transitions of using clean energy for heating up the room and so on. That could have been a right way to use it. Then about my positionality, for me as a European Union citizen, I feel that I have an agency in the European Union, and for me was also important that the power dynamics that there are with the Global South, we don't recreate in the core periphery of Europe that somehow could be considered also Global South within the North. So that was kind of my approach to this. To say we have to do European Union policies that are not just for us, but are considerate of everybody. Then what are the limitations of the interviews? I have to say that it was a bit funky, some of the interviews, because I was trying to bring this post-growth perspective to people that were completely lacking it. And for me, it was also a way to say, I bring you this argument, this knowledge, I want to see your reaction, I want to see if people can change their mind. And for example, with a policymaker, for me was very interesting to see how he also was representing some institutions that have nothing of a sufficiency approach, but he said, I came to the mine, I realized what the impact it has, I understand the importance of, but this person is an official, it's a bureaucrat, so it doesn't decide themselves. But for me, it was interesting because I think as an activist, I need to engage more with this conversation, also with people that have very different opinion or come for a very different positionality. Also, with the interview representatives, and for other limitations, of course, I didn't cover all the clusters, I didn't cover all the interview stakeholders, but because in Serbia, as you might follow, there is huge uprising against the government because, again, corruption case. And the movement, I was told, doesn't want to open up to interviews, basically. So it was very challenging to reach some of the stakeholders because of the situation in the country. The interview stakeholder closest to the company didn't want to have the interview, he sent me answers by email. So of course he answered what he likes, he pretends to understand what he likes. Then I want to say on the first you made the framework, yes, I agree with you that I could have elaborated more of frameworks on of justice. But it's also an open question for me because I don't find it, to be honest, in the literature or in the movements, a clear framework for justice, how to balance these pillars. Because also among the stakeholders, some told me justice, it's also an intergenerational concept. So someone was telling, I wouldn't force anyone to open a mine in London just because, even if they had the minerals, just because they had the colonial empire in the past, no? So it's very difficult, but we have to face the questions because the climate clock doesn't stop. So it's difficult questions, I recognize it, but I think we should also go beyond this polarization and facade, or we don't want the mine anywhere because this is against probably science-based targets, in my opinion. Then what did I learn? I learned that the context in the Balkans, when they were mentioning weak rule of law, I somehow relate. I'm from Italy. and I know what corruption in certain area means. It means that you say no to everything because it's destined to go wrong because of corruption, any kind of project. So I learned a lot of the context there. I learned that justice, it's a very difficult concept. But again, I think my strongest point is that we need to intake global South perspective in this conversation on mining in Europe. So yes, my position is probably more in between. And again, I think we should have a discussion on how to do mining in a non-extractive way. But this is very difficult with the current political situation, and maybe something that social movements can think about. I don't know if I took too much time to answer. Sorry.
No, that's all right. Thanks for the elaborate responses. It was right on time. Did you want to respond to any of that, Mariana, or should we switch to Nick?
No, thank you. No, just to make a distinction between extractive and extractivist. No, that has a specific approach in terms of scale, of impact, human rights. There's like a specific literature on that. But I just say something that you say science-based targets. What do you refer with that? Because I think that can also.
So I have to that's sorry for I just report the sources on the video, but Diego Marin, I hope he can be trusted. He was saying, we need 345 new mines for energy transition alone, accounting in recycling. And then he said, in the post-growth scenario, we don't know how much we need because the scenarios are not there yet. And I was simply bringing the point, okay, it's a fact that we need new mines, because also with this, there's actually literature reported on the fact that for many materials, like aluminium, the stock out there is already enough that you could rely on recycling, no? But for these transition materials that were marginal in terms of importance until yesterday, we don't have it. We don't have an existing stock out there. So even to just do transition technology, we need to extract some of these materials. And again, even if the extraction with post-growth scenarios is lower than 345 mines, how can, because of historical concentrations of mining in the global south and current dependencies of the European Union, how can we say no to the mining? And then maybe the question is, how can you do responsible mining? Maybe should that be the focus? But I think it's a bit sterile or undeserving also of degrowth, because degrowth, to say that no mining here, no mining anywhere, I understanding as a counteractive strategies because of power imbalances, but at the same time, I think the power of degrowth is not just you go on the street and say climate transition. You also bring a proposition for an alternative vision, and I think we have to do the same with mining. Say, okay, if you say no to the mining to anywhere, how do we do the transition, right, for technology alone? This is a fact, no? So this is it's super challenging. Good luck to whoever takes on these questions and tries to frame create a framework. But I think we should keep Global South at the front of our movements. And Fadel Kobab, super inspirational when he writes about Africa taking control of the resources and industrializing and so on. That means that probably the resources are used for their own, and if they have the extraction places there, it's also you basically have to stop the separations between who brings the cost and who brings the benefit of these mining activities, I guess. But that just some teaser, of course, because I hear too much monolithic statements on mining in Europe from my perspective in the degrowth movement.
Yeah, so I guess the direct answer to that question is from the Environmental Bureau, I guess, which is where he works.
Yes, exactly.
European Environmental Bureau, or the EEB.
But in the thesis you were mentioning that Diego mentions another source, which, but anyways, I think you answered the question, and now I understand your perspective. which this is such a political discussion as well. So we won't have now this discussion, but I think Nick can go on, and I think he also has some things to say. Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Marianne.
Okay. Thank you, Linda, and everyone for being here, and thanks for your work and for sending it to me, and also for this presentation. And I think it's a very timely analysis, and also I think in sense of a remote field report on a topic that's at the core of contemporary degrowth discussions, and not only in academic terms, but also on a day-to-day basis of us as European citizens, and also for policy making, and because there is an issue with resource consumption and sourcing in Europe and the global north, and I think that's very clear also in your work. And I think also the selection you made, it's very relevant and good to focus on two peripheral regions of Europe, although they're not member states. Also to avoid like a too broad scope of looking into very complex geopolitical situations, because of course I see also similarities with the land use conflicts around lithium projects here in Portugal, but there are definitely also differences also in terms of trust in government, and of course we're in a different situation of being a member state. So, and also think you presented a very relevant, in this terms, archaeology of the European Commission's policy. That's very relevant to the discussion around raw materials and extractions, also in the regions that you selected in the Balkans, because I think it's very clear that we see inherent land use conflicts in current raw materials policies, and how they affect especially marginal livelihoods, and that is obviously in the global south, and as well in peripheral and indigenous communities from the Nordics and to the Balkans, and here in southwestern Europe, also in Spain and Portugal. And I think there is also a very timely gap of decision making and policy making. I think you had this policymaker in your thesis, and that also, I think it was MEP Hildegard Bentley. She's one of the architects of the Critical Raw Materials Act, and she was in the European Parliament, where also Diego was now this February, and she said, we want industrial development, and the people that are voting for me, like she's from Berlin, they want industrial jobs, and even if that is at the cost of agriculture. So I don't know what like the agricultural lobby associations around Berlin think of this, but I think it presents a conflict that's present all around here. And I'm sitting here in central Portugal. I'm not in the center. Even if Portugal as such is maybe a periphery, I'm sitting here kind of in the mountains, in the middle of the northern central Portugal. So I think this discussion is very important. And I think you have also very strong focus, and rightly so, on the agency and the raw materials policy of the European Commission as such, and at least as their intentions are concerned, because so far we lack results. And I think you also, the data you've presented, it is there that this is mostly about intentions. I think it's important to highlight that all the way that led to the Critical Raw Materials Act in 2024, last year, it was only reports, it was intentions, it was communications, and they broadened their list of critical raw materials and strategic raw materials, but the only impactful, the thing that will have now with the strategic projects in member states announced 2 weeks ago, and with also Serbia being considered of being attributed strategic project status out of the member states. I think that's very relevant, and it will have definitely impacts, and it's also heating up, as you also said, like civil society debates around the topic. So, for example, also in terms of these concrete results in Portugal, very often it's attributed to be a lithium producer, while that's questionable. There's a lot of geological discussion also around this, of our Portuguese authority reporting lithium production to the US Geological Survey, which is the entity that issues these reports that now end up in the also European statistics, because the lithium that they declare to be exploited at the moment, it's used in bulk for ceramics. So these mines that exist at the moment in Portugal, they're not even, the material is not being able to be introduced into a lithium battery value chain. So these projects are different from those that are now considered to be eventually working in the next years on the value chain and lithium that is being able to be processed either here or abroad for then to be used in batteries. And while you have a very strong focus, I think, on European Commission perspective, I think would also be a very strong relevance, and also looking at Jadar on other geopolitical actors, because I think American representatives, they have been visiting the area together with also later on Scholz and Šefčovič. But I think to have a proper framing of this, I guess it would also be interesting to look at what are the roles also of China, of Russia, of the global actors that are in this scene. So I think that would be interesting. Now, 2 questions. I think I would have mainly like 2 or 3 questions. I'm an academic outsider to degrowth discussions. So I'm from cultural studies and with a focus on anthropology and post-colonial studies. So from what you've written, and would you say that there are some key concepts of the actual or the contemporary debate of degrowth and also post-growth? And if there are these concepts, is there a difference between degrowth and post-growth? If you have these concepts that you apply, because I think these terms, they pop up in your thesis. It would be interesting also to see how they actually work, or what's their intention and the methodology behind that. And then do you think that these, I mean, I think it's obvious in the text and also what you presented now on a practical ground, and how do these degrowth and post-growth debates communicate with your findings? What's the relation with the results of your field work? And I think because they are there, but they're obviously not part of the official documents. They're acknowledged maybe in interviews, but they're not acknowledged in day-to-day policy making. And also, maybe it would be interesting for me also to have your personal perspective on this. Like you said, you're from Italy, and what we've seen also in terms of the strategic projects that were announced for the member states of the European Union. There is a clear divide between centers and peripheries, and Italy saw, I think, a very strong focus on recycling projects. Yeah. And at the same time, processing is very strong in the core countries of the European Union, in Belgium, also in Germany. At the same time, extractive projects are very predominant, maybe in Spain, Portugal, in the Nordics, and also in Romania. So would be interesting also to see your perspective. Do you see like a core periphery divide in there, and also on your perspective on the Balkans? I think that would be that.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. So I wanted also to comment on the things that are not questions, but maybe I do or don't. No, just a quick comment on when you said on the roles of other actors in the regions. I agree it would be nice to explore more. I quickly touch on the fact that in the regions there are present all kind of capital, from Russian, Chinese, Canadian, and for me, from my understanding of the stakeholders, it says the government tried to create polarizations about calling the activists pro-Russian, pro-Chinese, because they object the project that is promoted by the European Union. But at the same time, it seems the underlying story is that through corruption, we sell the land and the resources to any kind of capital. We don't really make any distinguishment. So, and the fact that Rio Tinto's Chinese company has majority shareholder to me, it's a strong supporter of this argument to some extent. But this was just a quick comment. To come back to your questions, the first question was between degrowth and post-growth. So basically, the definition of degrowth is basically it's a reduction of resource use, energy use, you can tell, in the global north to allow the global south to reach minimum standards of living. And of course, in this perspective, let's say apply to the lithium, if we want to guarantee the right of mobility to people, there are different ways to do it. With an electric bus, probably you can use the same amount of lithium that you use for an electric SUV. I'm not sorry, I don't have the figures, but I can imagine. And per capita, basically, the lithium is less, and you guarantee the right of mobility. So it's about channeling, guaranteeing rights and basic needs to people with the least amount of resources, basically. I don't know if I gave you the idea. When it comes to post-growth, from my understanding, it's an entire way of embodying the growth principle into practice. So, for example, this was another point of discussion. No? Let's say we do the state mining. With state mining, the profits, first of all, allegedly in a post-growth state, a non-extractive state, the profits are not the main focus, right? So you engage with the community and you try to balance more stakeholders' interest. And then the profits goes to the state, no? So it can be reinvested for other purposes. Here, the profits fly away to Canada and to where the company is incorporated, no? To the shareholders. So also on that state mining, of course, at the moment, doesn't guarantee that if you have state mining, it's done better, unfortunately. But I hope it gives you a sense of understanding of what post-growth and the difference between post-growth and degrowth. I hope I was clear. On the relationship with degrowth with policies, again, it's about introducing. First, we need to understand what are our needs, and then we do policies that embrace these needs. Here, for me, from my understanding, is extraction and for extractions. When I talked to the industry representative and I told this person, the car industry is in crisis, no? Don't you ever wonder who you're gonna sell the lithium to if you have no undertakers? And this person was like, oh, there's so much demand that we will find someone anywhere. Yes, now it's the military industry. So that for me is just, in the era of ecological collapse, it gives you an idea of what we're doing, It's pure madness. And of course, I would have liked to chat with this person, but they refused. It was only typing. So we need the discourses on sufficiency for sure, but at the same time, it's a bit a chicken egg discourse. From a global justice perspective, my opinion, we need to onshore some of this extraction in Europe. So both ways basically has to be done. You start with whatever you like. And then on the question 3, I had a quick look on the distribution. And you're right, Italy does a lot of recycling. I saw some kind of pattern. And of course, this is maybe it's also about solidarity and transfer of knowledge across, it's about European integrations. So to ensure that you also bring the technology to do the industry where you also extract the materials. Yes, so I kind of see the pattern, and unfortunately, it seems the rule of law is strong conditions for the Balkans to have a claim on opposing the process, and given also the fact that other projects again are for export, other green energy processes are for export, no? So that's already shows the very same nature of extraction alone, no? That is not done in a just way. I hope I answered the questions properly in a clear way.
Thank you, Linda.
Sweet. Thanks all. Now the intention was to enter into another chat to discuss the grade. Will probably be between 5 and 10 minutes, I guess. And then we will come back in this chat, in this call. Sorry. So we'll see you in a minute.
See you.
Thank
See
you,
everyone in a
Linda.
minute.
See you now.
Christopher, do you have any comments? I would love to hear.
Turn my mic off. Would you like to just be by yourself, or I have a few things I would be interested to talk to you about, but I'd really be interested in actually seeing your thesis, because it's always very difficult in a presentation when things are going at high speed to follow the nuance. But yeah, I'm
very
interested.
happy to share. I'm very happy to share by email if you like.
Yeah. But you presented very strongly, Linda. Is all I can is what I can really claim. I think it's an interest. I mean, I think probably what I would say is I have missed some of the detail of positionality, and I'm kind of I kind of see things from perhaps a more ideological perspective, which I think you might call monolithic. I definitely don't think of not in my backyard and not here, not anywhere. But I'd probably, this is why I want to read your research, would probably approach from a position of what more do we need of those 345 additional mines? Really, whose interests are they for? Is this really for the transition